everyone. I will call to order the Board of Education meeting for Monday, November 28th. And please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, Rich, are you aware of any changes to our agenda?
No changes to the agenda.
I move to approve the agenda as presented.
I will second that. Thank you. Motion from Rick, seconded by Dave to approve the agenda. Questions on it? All in favor of approval signify with aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We have an agenda. Action on the minutes, which are included in board docs.
I would move to approve the minutes for the regular meeting held on November 14th, 2022 as presented.
Second.
Thank you. Motion from Dave, seconded by Jennifer to approve the minutes from our previous meeting. Are there any questions on the minutes? All in favor of approval signify with aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Thank you. Vouchers.
I'll make a motion to approve general checking account vouchers totaling $263,836.58 and building fund 49 vouchers totaling $139,489.55 as presented.
I'll second that.
Motion from Mike, seconded by Rick to approve our vouchers in the amounts just enumerated. Questions on those? All in favor of approval of the vouchers signify with aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Thank you. And one of the highlights of our meeting, as always, is to hear from our student council representatives, Holly and Mesa. Welcome.
Hello, as we have now finished our blood drive, we are switching to the focus on giving.
Later this week, we're going to be discussing the Christmas shopping for the families. And that's all we have for tonight, where we will be meeting on Thursday.
Ah, very good. Thank you. All right, public comment is next, and I picked up the sheet with no one signed in. So we will move beyond that to the superintendent update. Mr. Rich.
The first item on the superintendent update is our Red Hawk highlights from our admin team. So principals, directors, if you have things from your school or department that you want to highlight with the board, this is a great time to do that.
All right, good evening at the 4K3 World in the district. We have all of our schools getting ready for their winter concert that will be happening. The music teachers are working hard to get the students all tuned up and ready to sing those songs. We are buckling down to maximize this time between Thanksgiving and winter break. We've got a good 3.5 solid weeks of school, and we're really maximizing that time on task with students and teachers. We have an upcoming 4K family outreach, and they will be doing a make and take project event that will be happening at East, but all of the 4K families from the entire district go to that at one school. And we have all partnered together with Milton Community Action, and we are going to be doing some community support to help families in need during this holiday season. And students and families are donating to this community project.
For our side, just a couple updates for the board. Our student council had their elections just before fall break. They have their first meeting coming up soon. They're going to be organizing a food drive for the food pantry in the community. So just like if you're running for political office, they had to create a campaign, an advertisement, get signatures, have a teacher sponsor them, and the kids really did a nice job with it. So something neat to celebrate. Next week, we have our next installment of a bunch of the COP series. So Chief and Officer Schneider will be presenting to our 4th grade kids all about being an upstander. So what we can do together to stop bullying. It's been a long-standing tradition in our district. And then we have our concerts coming up on the 13th and on the 20th with the middle school at the high school this year. So we're looking forward to our students performing in choir and band again on the 13th and 20th.
All right, good evening. Since the last meeting, we finished our first rotation of iTime. iTime is our 6-week rotation of either a focus on reading or math based on iReady scores. And students are intentionally grouped by the area of need. We had a challenge for the students for this first 6-week rotation, 300 minutes and 10 past lessons. There were 92 students who met that, and so that's a significant number of students who worked for 300 minutes minimally and passed 10 lessons during that time. 74 of those students chose to go to a visit to Northside to go back to visit a teacher of their choice for 15 minutes. And 18 of those students chose to participate in Ultimate Lightning, which was also pretty fun to watch. The other thing to highlight tonight is our Avid Family Night that happened a few weeks ago. We had our 50 Avid students, almost all 50 were in attendance, and we had the students leading tutorials with their families and other teachers or administrators who were there. And most of the adults in the room, parents, guardians, administrators, teachers, felt silly a few times because the kids were really knocking it out of the park with how they were leading the tutorials. So it was a really positive experience for our family night. Thank you.
Hello. At the high school, busy days. Today was the start of the second trimester, so it was like the first day of school today. Many students had new classes and teachers had new schedules. It's also, we just last week, 2 weeks, we started the winter sports too, so it's really the third of the year, and we're excited about the things coming this season and this trimester for classes. A couple of events that have happened and are coming up. We celebrated, we believe this is the 28th year that Vietnam vets came and spoke with our classes. And actually, a few of the gentlemen have come every single time to Milton High School. This is just the last week of the trimester. We're preparing for the December 5th PD Day. Our English department will be working on a new ELA pilot, and we have the departments that are digging into ACT data. We'll talk about that later. This Saturday is the town leader invite and the new Milton pool. It's still great to be able to host those large events. Currently, the Cup band is on their way to go for the first night for the first hockey game in Stoughton. So a lot of events that are getting started. We're excited this winter too. We're hosting a couple large events. I just want to mention this now. This is going to be down the line, but we're hosting the Badger Conference Girls Basketball Challenge. So there'll be 8 schools with their varsity and JV teams playing, and the conference wrestling tournament as well this year. So the facilities being able to host those large events. And finally, I had the privilege of taking 8 students 2 weeks ago to Coloma to the operating engineers training facility. I got a bunch of students into excavators and a lot of heavy equipment. Several students are going to be going to the training facility. Great program, and I am not very good at that. They did get me into one of the excavators, so that was a lot of fun. Kind of a boyhood dream realized, but not very good at that. So thank you.
I'm here actually to excitedly announce that recently I was at the Wisconsin School Public Relations Association convention where the School District of Milton was honored with 2 awards in school communications. The first was an award of excellence, and that was actually recognition of a recent social media campaign we did celebrating the history of Title IX and Milton's proud tradition of inclusive athletics. We also won an award of merit, which was recognizing our COVID protocols family guide. So recognizing how we created useful tools to help our families navigate what can sometimes be a pretty complicated issue. So yeah.
All right, very good. And the second piece of Rich's report is an inclement weather update.
Yeah, there is a copy of the letter that went home to parents, and I just wanted to update the board on that as we're getting to the time of year when there's potential inclement weather, whether it's road conditions or snow or cold. A couple things that I want to highlight on that. It's pulled up on the big screen, and I won't go through all of it, but I wanted the board and folks listening in to be alert that we follow local road conditions as there's ice or snow, and make sure that roads are safe for transporting students and staff, both to or from school, depending on the time of day. If the National Weather Service issues a winter storm warning, then we typically would close schools for the full day or part of a day if it comes during the day. But I also wanted to note that because our school district covers a lot of area, a lot of square miles, that there may be good roads in some areas and not as good in others. We pay attention to that, especially for any areas where our buses need to travel. But we also remind parents that their decisions around the safety of their students override the school's decision. So if we feel that it's good enough weather for us to get our buses out and get everyone transported, but parents feel that in their particular situation, they'd be more comfortable keeping their kids at home, they certainly have a right to do that as weather approaches. There's information in that letter about how we notify parents. I won't walk through that, but we utilize both direct notification and local TV and radio stations. There are times when the roads might not be bad, but there's extreme cold. So if the National Weather Service issues a wind chill warning, which is when there are sustained 35 below wind chills expected, we typically, if that's going to happen during school hours, we typically would close school for that. And then the last thing that I want to highlight is the last two paragraphs talk about required instructional minutes and asynchronous learning. The state has a requirement on the number of instructional minutes at different levels. Our schedule calendar for this year put us with some wiggle room above that, and we want to have more than just the minimum. So we have that scheduled. With that in mind, our plan is that if we have two weather cancellations, those would be treated as typical snow days where students and instructional staff are not expected to work. But if we have any beyond two, then we would plan on having virtual instruction on those days. So it's not an action item for the board, but just an FYI to make sure the board was alerted to our plans and the information that had been shared out with parents.
Very good. Any questions for Rich around those topics? All right, moving down, next are presentations and a bit of number crunching and reflecting on what some of the numbers tell us and don't tell us around student achievement data. And I see Mr. Ruggles getting out of his seat. So I'm assuming it'll be a bit of a tag team effort between Rich and Ryan to.
Ryan will lead the walkthrough. I'll chime in, and Julia is going to share some information on our panorama, our new social emotional screener data too.
Excellent. So thank you so much, Joe. Thank you, members of the board. Looking forward to celebrating some good information with you here today. As we look at the state report card for 21-22, we're also going to be looking at some of our fall data as well, just so we can look at our full picture of how we're doing and then talk about kind of everything that we take into account as we're building our scorecard and we're working through the continuous improvement process. We definitely do have a lot to be proud of. We got some celebrations. As we talk here tonight, we got a great group of educators here in Milton. We got a very strong team. But with that, we also believe in continuous improvement. So when we look at data, we look at it from that lens of we always want to get better. We want to make sure we're serving all students. So we'll start tonight with some information around our 21-22 report card. And then we'll dig a little bit into our spring assessment data, starting with the forward, then our Aspire and ACT data. We're going to try to keep that at a high level, not break it down into school by school, but look at it from a K-12 standpoint. And then we're going to look at some of the high school AP data. Then we'll look at the fall screener data for iReady and then Choctaw. Julia will come up and share some of our new student survey data, which is some really interesting stuff around Panorama. And then we'll talk about next steps as a district. Basically, what are we doing with all this? So it's great. Between the report cards and all this data information, it gives us a lot to go with. What are we doing with it? How are our teams responding? And as part of those next steps, we'll get to hear from our building principals, and then they will give each a short example of how they're using data at their level to improve instruction. Before I get into the history of the Wisconsin State Report Card, I just want to start with our anchor statement for our portrait of a red hawk. And I'm not going to go into that deeply, and I'm not going to share all of our 5 characteristics, but I do think it's important, and it's a good reminder. There's a reason that's on the wall behind you. That there's a reason that it's in all of our schools, because we want this to be our living reminder of what we want in all of our students. This is what we want for all kids, and that should be the lens that we look at our data from the lens of continuous improvement. So, before we look at the state report cards, I wanted to share a little bit of information. I had shared most of this last year, but I thought it was a good reminder, just kind of why we do this and how we do this. So the first school report cards were given in 2011-2012 school year. And in that first year, it was by new state statute that we were required to do it. In that first year, we had 2 of our schools were exceeds expectations and 5 of our schools were meets expectation schools. Within the next school year, DPI had created a formula for not only for each school to have a report card, but also how to assign a score to the district. In that first year, the 2012-2013 year, the schools of Milton met expectations as a district. And kind of over the span of the last 10 years, we've historically have been a meets expectations or higher district. And as you know, we've been doing things really well here for a long time. Over 2 of those years, there was no report cards given, the 14-15 school year and then the 18-19 school year. The 14-15 school year, whole lot of reasons why they weren't given that year. There's the official version is there's some DPI technical issues that year. I think they struggled making some of the changes transferable into practice. And they weren't able to meet the timeline, so report cards were not given that year. And 18-19 report cards were not given because of the COVID pandemic. Both times, after there was no report cards, there was a big change in the state formula. And we talked a lot about that last year as we tried to dig into that new formula, and we shared how complicated it really is. From last year to this year, there are no changes. Definitely lots of discussion on the new model. I think there's definitely a better understanding of what this new model means. And once again, they are highly encouraging not to be comparing from district to district because of how the formula was created. With that, on the report card, there are 4 priority areas: achievement growth, target group outcomes, and on track to graduation. Now, I'll talk a little bit more detail when I get into individual slides for each of those areas. But what I'd like to point out on that priority area weights, that is different from not only from school to school, but it's also different for every single district. It's changed based on demographics, low socioeconomic population and such. And because of that makes comparisons very hard. But as you're looking from school to school, as you're looking at our districts, you are looking at other districts, we highly encourage you to look at that priority area weighting because that does make a difference. The accountability rating scale is below. That has been changed year to year as well. I think there's only slight changes from, actually, I don't think there's any change from last year to this year on that.
Quick question, Ryan.
Yeah.
The actual percentage weight put on each of those categories, is that a DPI determined
Yes,
balance?
yes, DPI determines that balance. All right. So for our report card, for this year, we were at a total of 68.3. That is up from last year at 67.4. So we're happy that we're moving in the right direction. As a district, we talked about some goals, and we set our C&I goals. We wanted to be the exceeds expectations district. In order to do so, we need to be at a 70.0, and we are moving in that direction, and didn't quite get there this year. Also wanted to highlight, as we talked about this last year as well, we had a very high participation rate as a district for our testing. Our principals and our staff did an amazing job trying to make sure that we tested as many kids as possible. Overall, we were at right around a 97% participation rate for testing. And we believe strongly that we want to test all of our kids because we want to know where they're at. And we want the most accurate representation of where we're at as a school and within our classrooms. That participation rate for the state was not included in this year's state report card, so we're not sure quite how that stacks up. We know last year we were quite far above the state in terms of our participation rate for testing. When we look into the priority rating areas, for achievement, we're at a 66.9 overall score. And as we compare that to last year, we were at a 68.0. So we were down about 1.1 in this category. Overall, we remain above the state's average in ELA and math. If you look at overall the state score last year, they're down a little bit more than the 1.1. So yes, even though went down 1.1, we're a little bit more above the state average for K-12 achievement last year for ELA and math. And again, the achievement is that overall score is K-12, so that's taken into account before it's taken into account the Aspire, it's taken into account the ACT. Our growth score this year was a 63.2. That was up from last year at a 61.3. So we're happy that we are moving in that direction. 2 points higher, but it remains a need for us. So I shared that each of the priority weights, it looks different from district to district, and also it can look different from school to school. So our K-3s do not get a growth score. Our K-3s only get an achievement score and an on track to graduation score, because what the growth score does, it looks at the trend over the 3 years to see that the students are making their growth at or above the rate of our state, if that makes sense. So that's following our kids over time, making sure they're making their yearly growth. When we look at our Chalk Talk Sports Leader and we talk about iReady, one of the reasons we put so much stock in that data is because of this growth scores, because we really want to make sure that we're looking at multiple data points for our kids and trying to move them forward with where they started early in the year. Again, growth remains a focus for us. Growth in our target group outcomes was something we talked about last year, so we're glad to see some movement, and hopefully we'll see some more movement within this next year as well. So target group outcomes is looking at our lowest scoring 25% of students and comparing it to the rest of our 75% of students, and looks at the areas of achievement, looks at those in their growth scores, looks at chronic absenteeism for K-12, and also looks at our graduation rate. So we look at just the graduation rate, it'll pull out that lowest scoring 25%, and that 95% score is based on our lowest scoring 25% didn't have a huge difference from our high scoring 75% of kids in our graduation rate. We've done a really nice job of providing opportunities for students over the years, and that shows within that score. As you can see, our achievement is where we have that biggest gap. So within our chronic absenteeism, our low score, yes, they have maybe a slightly higher absentee rate than the rest of our 75% of students, but it is that achievement score really that we need to get at. That is a continued conversation amongst the admin team.
I have a question, Ryan.
Yes, sir.
It seems redundant to say that the lowest 25% score the lowest in achievement. Am I missing something there?
So that achievement score, what you see in front of you, the 21.3.
Yeah, or whatever.
That's looking at the differential of that 25% versus the 75%. So that's what brought that score down. So the schools that have larger we have outachieved some schools, and they don't necessarily have a huge gap, so they might get they might get a better score in target group outcomes than we did.
So it's really a measure of that gap between the lowest 25% achieving students and the rest of the group. So if you have a overall high achieving group and it's relatively flat between the bottom 25% and the upper 75%, then that achievement score in the target, then that target group outcome achievement score is going to be pretty high. If that gap between the bottom 25% and the upper 75% is bigger, then you're going to have a lower achievement score in that target group outcome. So a good way to think of it is it's a measure of that gap between the highest achieving students and the lowest achieving students. So the idea there to improve in that area is to continue growth for everyone. So again, if you have your highest achieving students and your lowest achieving students, if your highest achieving students have a year's worth of growth from one year to the next, and the lowest achieving students have more than a year's worth of growth because you want to sink efforts in to get them caught up and support for them, then you're not only showing growth for both groups, but you're narrowing that achievement gap. This group grows and this group grows even faster.
Then the fourth priority scoring area is on-track graduation. And this is, we've been really strong in this category in the last 2 years. So up 0.1%, it's 88.3. This category is made up of 4 things. So it looks at chronic absenteeism, again, K-12. Looks at our overall graduation rate. That plays into this percentage. And then it also looks at our 3rd grade ELA data and our 8th grade math data. So somewhat of a double dip there that 3rd grade ELA data is part of our achievement data, 8th grade math is part of achievement, but also used as a readiness marker within this score as well. Happy to report that in all 4 categories, we are above the state average here. So we're feeling pretty good about this area. And this goes really well with our portrait of Red Hawk, readiness for everybody. I want to point out, as we did last year, as part of the report card, we're mandated to report out on music and arts and also post-secondary preparation. All those things don't play a part in the actual scoring of the report card, but they must be included within the report card. We're happy to look at some of these numbers for advanced courses. As a district, we're at 26.5%, well above the state average. That's down about 2 points because we were at 28% last year. We think that overall we're going to keep hovering right around those numbers in years to come, and we can kind of talk a little bit more about that when we look at our AP data here in a few minutes. Our dual enrollment numbers are up substantially to 42%, as you can see, well above the state percentage of 18%. And our industry recognized credentials in work-based learning both more than doubled over this last year. In the work of Amy Kenyon at the high school and the entire high school staff has been very important for those numbers as well. But it's definitely something we should be proud of. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on this slide. Definitely we don't want to encourage the comparisons within other districts, but we know people are going to do it. So what we want to focus on is our achievement, and looking at that K-12 achievement. And if we look at from a Rock County standpoint, if we would look at just the overall achievement scores, we have the highest K-12 in Rock County, and we also have the highest math achievement K-12 in Rock County. So we're very proud of that, and definitely our goal would be to remain the highest achievement school within Rock County, and also be the highest achievement in ELA and math. Now to dig in a little bit into what makes up these scores, we'll start with our forward. As we look at the forward proficiency for the spring of of last year. As you can see before you, the forward is made up of 4 tests. So the ELA test and math tests are taken 3rd through 8th grade every single year. The science test is taken in 4th grade and in 8th grade, and then the social studies test is taken in 4th, 8th, and 10th grade. Well above the state average for proficiency, or the percentage of proficiency in all those categories. And as we look at the trends, so obviously 1920, there was no report card given. So you see the jump from 1919 to the 20 to 21 school year. You can see the trend for ELA that just in that short amount of time that we were already above the percentage we were at pre-COVID, where we had 45% of our students that were proficient or above, and we're already at 46.9 for this last spring. Math, we're still recovering, but definitely recovered faster than the state percentage. Science, we're above where we were in 18-19 this last year, and same with social studies. I do want to point out that the last social studies stat number up there came from our Baird Analytics site. For some reason, it's not on the WISE site for the state. That the rest of that data comes from the state public website, so that those things you can find. But that was a one piece that wasn't updated on the state. And again, I'm not sure why that wasn't updated from the state. So looking at Aspire last year, and we're not going to look at the trends for Aspire, mainly because last year was the last year that we're going to have the Aspire test. So starting this year, we will give the pre-ACT to 9th graders and 10th graders in place of the Aspire. So we've already started to talk about what that transition looks like, and our high school staff has already started to look at some of the pre-ACT information. But as you can see, in ELA and in math and science, we had a higher proficiency percentage than the state. Also had a very higher testing percentage as well. And I thought that was important to include within this data as well, because when 13% of Wisconsinites are not taking the Aspire at high school level, I think that should be data that we report out. All right. So the next part of the report card, we use the forward data, we use the Aspire data, and then we also use the ACT data. So overall, our composite is up slightly from last year, but still below the state average. So the last 2 years for our ACT, we have fallen behind the ACT state average. I'll share that information now so you can see the trend from the 1920 school year through last year to this school year. We had a overall dip in our composite last year. Again, a slight uptick this year, not as high as we would have liked, but definitely is a focus area for us. And then you can see not only after our composite, how that breaks down for ELA in our math as well. We had some upward movement in math and science back to hopefully where we were and above. And in ELA, we had another slight bump. Now, this year, we have implemented a new ELA K-8 resource, and the high school will be piloting a new 9 through 12 ELA resource later in the year. So they're working through that process right now in an effort to really increase our rigor and make that a focus. So,
Ryan, do we, I know in years past, essentially everybody took the ACT. Is that still the case, or is that changed from a policy standpoint?
Yes, yeah.
One of the things in having kids this age that I struggle with is for years, you needed to take the ACT for your college entrance exam, and now they're not looking at them. And if you're going to require everyone to take the exam, and you're trying to motivate kids to do well, but there isn't the hook at the end of, but you need this for your college entry. It's hard if you have everyone, I guess, point being, if you have everyone, you have to take it, which I think is a good idea, but the carrot at the end of all of this is it will help you get into school is no longer there. I struggle, and I don't have an answer for this, but I don't, how do you motivate kids to try to do well, especially if you're asking everyone to do it, which again, I think is a good idea, but I struggle with how do you motivate kids to say, really invest some time in doing well in this, when the UW system and other college systems have, for whatever reason, decided to take a step back from really looking at it.
So, what you bring up is, it's real. It's definitely an ongoing conversation that we've been having at the high school, and all high schools, frankly, have been having that conversation. Motivating students to do their best, to understand the why of why we give this exam, that it's used in multiple ways, used not only to help us get better as a school, but as a district, and gives people of our community information, but also to give our students information about how they're doing as a learner and how they stack up. When the buildings come up and talk about kind of how they're using data, I'm sure Jeremy could share more about all those ongoing conversations, but I know they've had extensive conversations around that, the high school around that exact same thing.
Yeah, just one thing to add to that, and I think Ryan hit on it a little bit, but there's something that I want to add to that. And when the principals can come up and talk, one of the things they'll speak to is that we utilize this data both as a systems check, how are we doing overall as a district, but also to see where individual students are and identify if students need additional support or if they need more challenging material. But we know that each of these individual tests, when taken individually, are just one point in time. It's a measure of how the student did that day on that particular assessment. There's a lot of other things that go into a teacher or a school's efforts to determine if a student is meeting the standards or not. And Dave, you're absolutely right that if there's not a strong motivation for students to do well, some students will give it their all on a test because they want to perform as well as they can. But if they don't have any benefit to themselves to doing their best, we know that both in our district and in other districts, not every student will try their hardest. So we don't say this is the end all and be all to measure how our students are doing. It's another data point on how individual students are doing and on how the system is doing. Go ahead, Ryan.
Also want to share some of our AP data from last year, and if you look at the column farthest to the right, 2023, that's the number of students that are signed up for the AP exams as of the creation of this PowerPoint. So as you can see over the years, we've had a high number of students and a high number of AP exams that have been taken. In the 2021 school year, you see a dip, and then you see a pretty consistent number from that straight forward. So in the 2021 school year, that was when we made the switch to trimesters. So I want to highlight that as the reason we talked about that when we were talking about going to a trimester, that would be one of the things that would happen, that students would have less courses. But overall, we looked at all the positives that would come from the trimester. The positives outweighed that. And we also looked at the balance of students as well. We had some students that had taken an incredible amount of AP courses in a year. We also want to be mindful that we're giving kids rigor, but we're taking care of their SEL as well. And that we're giving them a good balanced load. Happy to see, as we look at last year's pass rate of those with a 3 or higher, that we jumped back up to one of our highest rates we've had at over 80%. And really that's a testament to our teachers that are really know that AP test inside and out. Yes, sir.
If I recall in the past, taking an AP course was I don't know if this is a technical term for it, but essentially a 5.8. Is that right? And now it is not. It's not Going back to how do you motivate kids to do things, I feel like if I were 16 years old and I was contemplating taking an AP class, the opportunity to get a 5.A was an incentive to take a more challenging class because there was risk and reward. In the absence of the 5.A or 4.B or whatever, the risk remains, right? It's more challenging, but the reward for doing it is moot. And I struggled when that change was made before, and I feel like, at least in part, the number of kids doing this, it speaks to the fact that if you want someone to take some academic risk, you have to provide them some academic reward. And I feel like going from 220, 230 to 160, in part, would be an outcome of taking away the reward that goes along with additional risk.
One thing to remember too is the Latte system was corresponding. We removed the weighted grades. We also had the Latte system. So students would take an advanced placement course and other dual enrollment courses, except for articulated courses or honors classes. Those are Latte points as well too. So starting with the class of 2023, that's when we remove the weighted grades. We'll have a Latte honor system at the end of the year as well too. So that is as you say, the reward for taking those courses. That's indicated on transcript and at graduation as well.
Jeremy, because some board members weren't on the board when that change was made, can you give a little bit more explanation of the Latte system?
I'll give a high level version of that, and I can certainly answer more questions later too. We brought this forth, I think it was 5 years ago, we introduced the concept of making this change. But as more and more schools our colleges were taking our weighted grade, our 5.A, our 5-point system was extremely antiquated. Every student's grade point average is actually converted back to a 4.0 for college admissions. Okay, so, and just to be blunt, we had a false sense of a better grade for college admissions. All right. And so we realized that we needed to make that change. Many schools, there are very, very few schools that still have a weighted grade system for that exact reason. But when you remove that, you're exactly right. Many students were taking the AP courses, honors courses, because they wanted that 5-point ability to get a 5.A. The Latte system was a very common approach towards that. So having a recognition at the end of the year. So the students' grade point average times total Latte points that they accumulate after 11 trimesters equals their Latte score. And then students can it's the highest level, summa cum laude, magna cum laude, and then cum laude. We recognize them at graduation. That's something that students are taking a look at now. They take a look and see, is this a Latte point or is this not a Latte point? You give us other opportunities too to expand what gets an honor point, a Latte point. So if you take 4 years of before our gas metal arc welding, which is articulated Black Hawk Tech and has a lot of Black Hawk Tech credit that goes along with it, that was not a weighted grade, but has every bit of skill and is important for those students as well. So we were able to expand what a Latte point was. So to your point, the Latte system was meant to replace the weighted grades for some of that incentive for taking rigorous coursework.
But I also believe there is a reward to taking an AP course, and that's getting those college credits.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think to say that the reward is moot is not true.
Not every AP class can get you a college credit.
Yes,
correct?
if they take the test.
If they take
the test. Yes, one of the things too in 21 that they did, college boards changed. College boards changed. You have to sign up for these girls and all this. You have to sign up in the fall for the test that's in May. And I think that has had across the board had a decrease in the number of students who are taking AP exams as well too, because historically our students gain confidence because they've got some pretty good teachers that are working with them that they would then choose. And they might have taken just for that weighted grade before, but they realize, hey, I can get college credit. I'm very disappointed with college board made that decision, but I don't control it. So that's part of the trimester and only having a maximum 5 AP classes they can take versus 8. That is a reason why you see that number going down. But I also believe when students have to sign up, that I know that it's also caused some students not to take the exam.
Okay. And you have to pass the test.
They also have to pass the test.
It's more than just.
Yeah, and the state average is usually right around 8%. That's really something to celebrate. I mean, state average is around 65%, and the nation's just over 50%.
Do you have a breakdown of how many sophomore, junior, seniors these numbers are, like out of the 164, how many?
Somewhere, yes. I don't have that.
Okay, I'd be interested to see that. My other one is, do you have any data that shows like when they take honors, that increases their chances of taking AP classes when they take honors classes as freshmen or whatever, or are you finding that they're dropping off? Because I'm hearing like students saying, I'm not gonna work, I don't wanna work that hard anymore. As a senior, instead of going forward after they've already been on that route.
Right.
The last 2 years, I've heard kids just not.
To answer your question, it doesn't reduce their chances for taking it. It's not, honors courses are not a prerequisite. We really.
No, but I'm just wondering if that is.
Do they choose to stop not going to the AP if they've taken honors? They don't have that sustainability.
I'm just wondering if that encourages or discourages if you have any data that shows what it is.
Students who have taken the honors courses certainly do better in AP classes. I will say that.
Because that number is a drastic drop for the size of kids we have in each class. That concerns me.
Sorry.
So if we move on to the fall academic screener data, again, I want to highlight the main uses of our screener data. Number one, we use it within our classroom, with our classroom teachers, to plan for interventions, to goal plan the students around the year, at that K level with iReady, just to really push students to meet their stretch goals, to meet their yearly growth and more for each school year. But then it also gives us some information overall at a grade level for schools and as a district, and how we're doing as well. But the most important way to use it is within our classroom instruction. But secondary, it's also nice for us to be able to take a high level look at it as we're doing right here. This first slide is our screener data for iReady from the fall. Now, if you look all the way to the left, we have our historic national norms from pre-COVID times, 18-19 school year, and then we have our national in-school tests. Now, why they have in-school for national and for Wisconsin, iReady has quickly become one of the biggest screeners in the nation right now. And right now they're the most widely used screener over STAR and MAPS, just because of the great information it gives you, and it also can help build the skill set that our students might be lagging in. And so it's in school because so many virtual schools around the nation have also taken on iReady, but they take that data out and report it out separately. So all the data here is scores of students that have taken the test in school setting. So as you can see, looking at the national in-school tests and the Wisconsin in-school tests, we have a much higher percentage of students that scored at mid or grade level or early on grade level, and a much smaller number that are within that red. Now, the at a high level of how we use this information within the classroom, obviously we build specific goals for each kid. But our goals are, we want to move kids from the red up into the yellow, we want to move those yellow kids up into the green, and move those low green all the way up to the dark green. So we want to move kids up from level to level and shrink that red. That is the hope with ELA and MAP as we look at that data. As we look at our math score, it's similar, not as strong in terms of percentages above the national, but still we're feeling good with how we're scoring versus the Wisconsin and on the national. As you can see, we've definitely bounced back and are above where we were at from a national historic norms pre-COVID, and I think that's pretty powerful data for all of our K-8 schools and K-8 teachers. So we're excited to see that. Definitely want to point out, if you look at the national in-school fall data, a very small percentage of students in that top green level, mid on grade level. That is what we're hearing overall. And I think Wisconsin has been a little more successful within that math. But from all the information we've heard, we see that the nation is really landing in that math score. So we're definitely above the national average and the state average.
Quick question, Ryan.
Yeah.
With the different color blocks there, if I'm understanding it right, where do kids land that are above grade level or significantly above?
They would land in that mid on grade level. They would land in there.
I didn't understand when it says mid or on. I didn't know how we're accounting for the kids that are.
Yeah, they were looking at how they're doing on that literacy standard, so that's where they would show up. So if we break this down and look at for ELA and math, ELA on the left side and math on the right side, kind of how we scored this year in the fall on the screener versus last year fall on the screener. Definitely slightly better in ELA. We made some improvements there from year to year. Math was pretty similar. But again, just wanted to kind of look at that as more of a trend. And we hope that we see that trend continue to be positive and continue to grow more in green and have a smaller number of them. So we use Chalk for our 9th through 12th screener, or 9th through 11th screener. And the thing about Chalk, it doesn't give us a whole grade level percentage. It doesn't give us a printout for the entire school. What it does, it gives us two really nice printouts for each individual classroom. And it's really about individual goal setting for our students. Now, we have communicated with Chalk because they are a newer company and a growing company. They said, hey, this is something we like. We love this classroom view because we definitely want to push our students into individual scores. But we're hoping that in years to come, we'll be able to see something like on this slide or on the next slide, where it breaks down kind of where our kids are at from a skill standpoint, specifically within ELA and math. So that would kind of help us find our gaps in our curriculum and teach along the way. But for now, we use this data, these two different forms. So the first one is given a predicted score within each area for the student, and then that second classroom view is again how the students break down in specific skills within ELA and math. And then, so for instance, for the ACT math geometry foundations, our teachers would say, okay, so here's all the students that are in the red right now. They're going to assign some work that goes directly to that skill. So students will be given some support for the categories that they need some support in. All right.
How are we doing? Good?
Lots of numbers.
Not a lot coming into you. All right, so I'm going to give you kind of a high level of our brand new screener. Again, just a reminder of the competency areas that we surveyed. So we had the social emotional competencies, and then we had the environmental support. So the first one was our competency area. So we could choose from a variety, but we did narrow it down. So self-management, social awareness, emotional regulation, and then in 6 through 12, we added another competency area, which was the social perspective taking. So the bolded questions are kind of the high level look fors, and then some example questions. And then the topics that we asked about for the environment were the student-teacher relationships, sense of belonging, school climate, and school safety. Now again, this took place of that connectedness survey that we used to give some of our buildings. All right, so who responded? So we had all the schools respond, a total of 3,227 students. And then they broke it apart by homeroom because our students took the survey in their homeroom, so that's where that 142 comes from. their homerooms or their classrooms. So at a high level, our district is in what they call good standing or on track to being socially emotionally proficient by the end of the year. So specifically, 72% of the students that were surveyed are on track with their social emotional skills for the end of the school year. Okay, and then this is a screenshot of what the Panorama platform looks like. So it breaks it down by the 3 through 5 and the 6 through 12 and then the K2. So 3, 5, on the top there you see the self-management, social awareness, emotional regulation. So again, those social emotional skills. And then the bottom portion is the supports in the environment. So we want to see that percent favorable, the blue column, we want to see that in a higher range. So all of the questions in the Panorama survey are created so that our students can respond favorably. They're positively framed. So we want to see students answer almost always or frequently or in that range of things. And then on the far right column, you'll see the comparison to the national normed benchmarks. So just a quick glance, a green dot is compared to others nationally ranked, we're doing pretty well. Just an example, when you're actually in the platform in Panorama, you can click into each one of these little bars and it will help you kind of disaggregate the data. It's very well laid out and easy to understand, but it does take time to kind of dig in there. So that's what our student services team started with. But for example, like one of the self-management questions was, during the past 30 days, how often do you follow directions in class? So we want to see almost always I follow directions in class or frequently. That's where that percentage, that 79% comes from. So we had a high rating there. Another example, if we kind of dig down into self-management, I can see that 727 3rd through 5th graders were surveyed, and overall in that bolded question that I talked about in the last slide, 79% of them responded favorably that they are able to manage their emotions, thoughts, or behaviors in different situations during the school day. So it's exciting to see. And then we
quick question.
Yes.
For the possible responses, you're asking for we want them to be favorable. I'm assuming, are there like 5 choices with 1 being somewhat neutral and 2 being somewhat negative? Is that kind of the spectrum they can
Absolutely.
pick?
Yeah, so almost always, frequently, sometimes, not likely was one of them, and then almost never.
Okay.
Good question. And then here again, same layout. So on the top is our social emotional skills for grades 6 through 12, and then the supports in the environment. So here in the blue is where we ranked there, and then compared to national norms, you can see a different color bubble. Again, at a quick glance, that gives us something to kind of be curious about how we ranked compared to the schools in the nation that also took the Panorama survey. So again, if I click into one of these topic areas, I can see, for example, that of the 1,600 students that were surveyed, 45% of them responded that they could regulate their emotions almost always or frequently. So you can't see that in the screenshot, but that's kind of what the information I can get from the Panorama platform. You'll notice, for example, in the sense of belonging, there where it says 40% responded favorably. If I dig into that one, so about the 1,600 students that were surveyed, the 40% said that they do feel like they're a valued member of the school community, of the school. But compared to the national benchmark, that score is like the 10th percentile compared to the database. So something to get curious about, something to kind of dig deeper in, and the platform allows us to do that all the way down to kind of individual homerooms to look for something to maybe some action item to take there. Yes.
Do they provide them, so for example, school climate and sense of belonging? Do they, those are broad ideas. Do the schools that are on the other end of the spectrum, does the software provide some strategies on what's the most effective way to address these things? Or is it, here's data and you figure it out, approach from the providers of this? I mean, obviously, being in the lowest quintile on both of those is concerning, but the question is, what do we do?
Absolutely. Yeah, so Panorama has something that is called the Panorama Playbook. And so with all of this information, it will say, here are some strategies or supports or lessons that you could do to increase this skill or to increase this support or something within your environment. So it gives you those kind of springboards to go off of. And then obviously, with the connectedness survey, we've gotten information like that before. And so schools are going to do kind of their own next steps that they have done previously. But yes, that playbook was a big feature of choosing Panorama and the levels Panorama that we did. So that is going to be utilized for next steps as well.
Quick question.
Yes.
Are we able to compare this data to regional or state comparisons, or is it only national level?
We don't get the breakdown of region or state. I can ask Panorama if we can know who around us, besides like my network of people that I've asked, we're the only ones that use Panorama. But you know, I can definitely ask if we can get that information. That would be interesting. Yeah.
Julia, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Do you know how many questions the students were to answer in each of these categories?
Yes. It was between 4 and 5 in each of the categories. We had a total of, I think it was like 27. There was a breakdown that I had when I gave the preview. I kind of gave it overall. I think it was 17 and then in the 20s for the other one. But we were mindful of just asking too many questions. That's why we didn't do all the competency areas. But yes, it gave all of the examples of the questions.
So like the back a few slides, we're in the school climate number 3. So there are the sample questions. So there are 4 of them. Mm-hmm. So again, is this pretty much what the students saw?
Yes.
The question that they actually were asked?
That is the question that they were actually asked.
That's good to know. All right. Thanks.
Julia, could this be, excuse me, could this be taken down to the individual student? Because say like a student says, oh, I never feel safe at school.
Mm-hmm.
And I assume something's going to be done
We'll
to
respond to that. Absolutely.
contact that student, let their family know. And,
Yes, yeah. And that's why our student services team were the first to have their eyes on it, was for those purposes. And then they met with their admin teams and they were going to create kind of next steps from there. My message from the beginning in a collective conversation with our student support team is that we're going slow with this information. It's new to us. We want to be intentional. We want to do it right. We're going to have to adjust because, you know, we don't know what we don't know. But we can dig down into that information and absolutely be responsive. And our student services members know these students in their buildings. And so if this was one indicator, there's also other data points that we look at, and you know, kind of kids that do flag might be ones that our student services team members know already because there are frequent visits, you know, during the day or during the week. So yeah, it's just another data point to look at and respond to your questions. And then our K2 taker was the teacher perception survey. So our students, our littlest learners, did not take a survey. So their teachers reported on their environments and supports, which was that connectedness piece, and then the social emotional skills. So for example, of the 678 students that the teachers reported on, 81% responded favorably that their students could or were accepted by their peers. That was one of the connectedness questions. There was another one too, but 81% of the teachers that responded felt like the students were accepted by their peers. And then on the social emotional skills side, of the 600 some that the teachers reported on, their perception was that 37% of them were able to manage their own emotions, thoughts, and behaviors. Now, again, at this level, students are still understanding what a big emotion is. How do I respond to it? How do I appropriately manage my emotions? What does that mean? So they're still learning these skills, So this is just kind of a point in reference at the beginning of the school year. And then again, when we survey at the end of the year, we're going to want to hopefully see some growth in those emotional skill areas because we're teaching those skills yet. Any questions for me? Otherwise, Ryan's going to go back to kind of some takeaways, and then we'll hear from Ryan and team.
Thank you, Julia. Definitely some really good information there and some good wonderings and some good takeaways. When we look at all the information that we had today from our report cards, some of the information from the assessments that make up the report cards and even looking into our fall screener data, from a high level, there's definitely some things that step up, that kind of stand out from celebrations and from areas for growth or just areas that we want to shine on and address as a team. Number one, we are happy that our student achievement is the highest in Rock County, remains higher than the state, and that will remain the goal that we continue to increase that we continue to be the highest achievement and that we will meet the needs of even more students. We were happy to see positive growth and that positive movement in growth and the target group outcomes. Those were the two priority areas that we talked a lot about last year. That will continue to be a focus and conversation for us moving forward. Now the celebration is that on track to graduation remains high for us. That is a super positive for all of our community and families and students. And then that SEL skills that on track for 72% of our students in grades K-12. So that is a celebration. Those last 2 points, those last two celebrations definitely go hand in hand with that approach of Red Hawk as well. And then overall, some areas of growth, that target group outcomes and student growth scores. Even though we've made some positive movement on those two categories, those remain areas of need for us and will remain a major focus for us throughout the year as well. Another area that we want to continue to improve that would move both those areas as well is that college and career readiness mindset for all students. Again, when we looked at the difference between our 25% and our 75% of other students in that gap, how we make sure that we have that readiness mindset for all of our students, and that translates across the board. And also that wonder around that sense of belonging for school climate at the 6-12 level. We want to dig into that a little bit more and see what that means and how we can improve upon that. So next steps. So we will continue to update our scorecards, the buildings, and they will work with their guiding coalitions. Their guiding coalitions are their building level team that created their scorecard or their building level goals. And a big part of that is our universal practices, that we're strengthening our universal practices for all students, and for those that are behind, that 25%, what are we doing through our MLSS plan to help catch those kids up and give them more than 1 year's growth. We continue to use our Monday early release PLC time to address our data, and also our PD days, those green days throughout the calendar, are focused on building level needs and level needs. So the focus of those days are going to be to support the building level goals and their scorecards, where the teachers will use their data from iReady and Chalk Talk and Panorama and common classroom assessments to really improve our practices and focus on those universal practices. I wanted to have that separate bullet point of target group outcomes because I've said it a lot today, but I'm going to say it again. This is our call to action. As I look at that being our lowest score within our report card, to me and to many in our team, that is our call to action. That is something we definitely want to improve upon. We want to make sure that we're meeting the needs of all kids. So I'm going to next invite up principals from each level so they can kind of talk about kind of how we responded to the data. Each of them just has a couple minutes. They're going to share how they've been using data within their business.
So I will share on behalf of our 4K through 3rd grade buildings. And as you know, the school report card is based on, for our level, very limited amount of data. So when we get our school report card, we look at that data first as elementary leaders. We're the only level where there's more than one principal for the buildings at that level. So we look at the data from a big picture, the high level as far as how is our district at large doing. We examine that at that level because we then have input on how we can adjust our curriculum and instruction for the universal that would impact all of our learners. We do take it back to our school level for our guiding coalitions, as Ryan just mentioned, and drill down a little bit more on our school-specific data, using other kinds of data like iReady to help us kind of analyze where we're doing, how we're doing. The one takeaway that we wanted to highlight tonight, to keep it short, is that over time we've noticed that we have performed not as well in the English and language art area as we have in mathematics. So we did adopt a new resource for ELA this year with Wonders. We've noticed already some achievement changes, and we're excited to see where this takes us. Wonders does a nice job of systemically looking at making sure the students are learning having exposure to all of the standards. We're seeing a lot more vocabulary development, for example, and it's just been an eye-opener to see how it's really balanced out how we approach teaching ELA for all of the standards. So we have to hope that that's going to have an impact on our assessment results as well. So that's the big change and the big takeaway.
For Northside, first of all, I want to say I'm super proud of our students and staff. We saw an improvement in achievement growth in our overall score on the report card. We noticed a real strength in the area of math that I want to highlight for the board tonight. Nearly 20% of our Northsiders scored advanced on Wisconsin Forward last year. So that's students scoring in the 90th percentile or above. So that gives you that indication of what they had to achieve. So it's a real testament to our staff and students' efforts in the area of math. Our PLC's leadership team take a deeper dive into the data using an item analysis tool that we learned this year that Ryan has shared with us. And it allows us to break down the test by standard. So it gives us an idea of proficiency levels in the areas of ELA, math, science, and social studies. It really gives us a better idea of how our students are performing. And it's valuable information for our teachers too, to be able to plan, adjust their units, their pacing, their resources, and materials. So really digging into that information now. And it's the first year in my, I think, 11 years of district that we've had that type of insight into Wisconsin Forward. So it's been kind of neat to look at. I'm a self-acknowledged data dork, so it's something I'm into. An area that we noticed that we need to work at is writing. So writing was something that stood out at Northside that our students did not perform as well in. So we're excited with like K3, a new ELA resource this year, and our kids are writing a ton in ELA class. But something as a leadership team that we're really working in is how can we get kids writing more across the curriculum? And really citing textual evidence and making sure it's credible and having specific reasons to back up their claims or ideas. So that's something that we're working at as a school to try to improve. The panorama data has also been really interesting. Our student services team, we've been looking at that information, created a data wall based on that information, our office disciplinary referrals, as well as attendance, and then any sort of teacher concerns to try to address student needs as we're forming groups as we head into December with our counselors, our school psych, and our school social worker. In addition to that, it really gave us an insight into how kids are feeling about our school. So it was really neat to get that information and really affirm that we have positive teacher-student relationships at Northside. I think one of the questions on there was how do you feel respected by your teacher? Kids had to report favorably, right? So like Julia was talking about before, like 93% of Northsiders feel respected and valued by their teachers. So it was really kind of neat to see some of that information. But we also had some kids reporting like one, they didn't feel connected. So we alerted teachers to that and shared some of the strategies from Panorama for them to be able to try with those students to help them feel more connected to our school.
The photo on the screen reminds me, I didn't mention this at our share-up, but that was our middle school Unity bowling event. And apparently the nachos and the french fries were just as interesting as the actual bowl. There's a little smile for you to start off. So as far as responding to the data at the middle school, there's kind of 4 areas that we focus on. So it's the common summative assessments within the PLCs to see where students are at with meeting those grade level standards or skills. The target group of list of our target group of students that comes from our Wisconsin Forward, our iReady data, and then our most recent Panorama data. And as far as who responds to the type of the data, it really depends on what our focus of the moment is. So weekly, Ben and I meet with each of the PLCs, and we're looking at those grade level standards and how students are doing in relation to meeting those grade level standards. The students who are in the target group and the students on our panorama data who listed that they have no skills in the 4 areas of self-management, social awareness, emotional regulation, and social perspective. We're kind of cross-examining those lists of students, and we're working on, I'm not sure the name of it yet, but a huddle or a clinic or a workshop with those 34 students where our student services team within the building, our social worker, Ben and myself, will have a group of students that kind of rotates through all 6 of our groups to build some skills in those areas. So that's kind of our most recent panorama information. And then iReady is really kind of our celebration of the way that we use data within the school. So our kids know it as iTime. And at the beginning of last year, iTime, that was the first time we used that term, and really showed us how many students kind of clicked through the first assessment, because then they were placed based on their data, and then they were like, wait a minute, this is way too easy for me. And they started to realize that, hey, you're going to be using this data for a significant amount of time. So from the fall screener, there's 1 reading rotation of 6 weeks and 1 math rotation of 6 weeks. And that is specific to that skill that's most in need of improvement. As far as making those groups, there are 11 groups in 8th grade and 11 groups in 7th grade, math or reading groups. And for the past 8 rotations, last year and the first one this year, Ben and I have spent a lot of time making those. Something really exciting happened recently with our math team, and they said, wait a minute, when we do some mixed groups of students who are 3 or more grade levels below, 1 or more grade level below, do some peer tutoring within the groupings, and kind of took it upon themselves to regroup some students with their rosters and really making it meaningful with the students who they're working with, they know as learners. So I think that's only going to continue to enhance the way that our kids are working with the adults. And then the iReady piece, the kids are working towards those rewards we talked about, but also seeing like, I want to be in that next group. I want to get to an enrichment group. I want to improve my score. So kids are talking about their My Path. They're talking about their instructional groupings in ways that they weren't last year. So I think that's only going to continue to build upon the work that we're doing. Thank you.
All right. Still with us here? All right. At the high school, obviously, as we take a look at the data, the ACT data and the Aspire data, we have concerns. We're celebrating the fact that the achievement levels still are overall quite high. Very, very happy with the AP scores. As far as the percent pass, we're thrilled. We've never hit 80% before. We're very happy about that. But as Ryan mentioned, that targeted score, that about 25%. In scorecards in the past, we didn't have that score on it. And as when I see that, and I see the distance between that and distance and growth, level of growth between the bottom 25% at the top, I really see why the state put that in there. And that is a call to action. While we can be very happy with some high achieving students, we also do need to make sure we are focusing on the bottom 25%. That's what our building leadership, our learning leadership team has been doing. That Chalk Talk data, as Ryan mentioned, has been very helpful. It's a tool, it's a really new tool. We're still getting to learn how to use it and deliver that screener. But what it's been able to do is give us specific skills that are ACT skills in which individual students are deficited. Now we have one of our teacher leaders, Jan Wells, who is actually taking a leadership role within that, reviewing a lot of that data with admin and our building leadership team. And we actually they did 2 things. We actually did 2 things with the overall Chalk Talk data and the Aspire data. And that is we identified what are those specific skills in the ACT that were the most deficit. And I wanted to have the 4 main areas. We're taking social studies to focus on the reading one. What are the 3 to 4 skills that are the lowest overall achievement? And we had very deep dives within the PLCs during our first PD day and also during our PLC time of how do we really embed that universal, those specific skills that we scored the lowest on across all areas. That's all classes. Whether it's English 9 all the way up to AP Lit, how do we focus on those, put an additional focus on those specific skills. So that's one specific thing that's been done. The other thing that the leadership team has done, and Jan has worked on with this, is taking individual students, so students who have specific skills, during our study flex time, if we find these are 10 students that have this one skill that they were deficit in, what Chalk Talk does is gives us a lesson, and that lesson might be literally looking at this one skill. There's 3 practice problems talking about what this is, what those students did wrong on the test, and giving them a practice set. And during a 40-minute study flex, they really focus in on that one skill. And so we have been starting to run those. We have started small to see how does that work and how is that working. We are looking at how to upscale that. But again, that's very dialed down work, diagnostic work, to see where these specific students which need specific skill work, and hopefully see an impact on that in this next step. So that's, again, that's the first level here, which is utilizing the Chalk Talk data. I think it has promise. We're still doing that. And then finally, there obviously some concerning data with the SEL and the panorama. We are actually, the high school student services team is really digging into that this week. We are obviously going to be looking at school climate and sense of belonging, what is some of the information behind those numbers. That's different than some information we've gotten in our Connectedness survey in the past. So that was actually quite concerning. We want to dig more into that. That's something we're working on starting outside the trimester. Thank you.
Before Ryan closes out this presentation, are there questions or thoughts from the board on the information that the principal shared?
Ryan, just one last question for me. What are the criteria for kids who have to take some kind of a course for summer school? I mean, as I was looking at the charts on 21 and 22 and 23, I mean, if someone's 2 grades behind in a topic, to think you're going to make up in a couple weeks of tutoring or something seems, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems kind of plausible. Is there enough kids going into the, hey, summer's coming, we really need you to take math or English or something in summer school, where there's more of a structured period of time rather than trying to squeeze something in after school or before school? Like I said, if it's, I need a little tweaking to catch up, that's one thing. But again, I mean, we're talking kids are, trying in that targeted group to catch up 2 grade levels or something as a certain topic. That's a tall order to do. How outside of summer school, I mean, what are the strategies for such? I mean, that's a big jump to make, I guess is my point.
Yeah. So in regard to summer school, we've been doing a little bit less with remediation and more with enrichment from a summer school standpoint. And even within our enrichment courses, we've been trying to build in some skill building as well in some of those courses. From a remediation standpoint, there's not a lot of great data around the use of summer school from a remediation standpoint. And getting not only students but also the staff for those courses has historically been a lot of work in order to get staff to continue to come back and teach those remediation courses over the course of the summer. So yes, we do some, maybe not as much as we used to, and really our focus has been on that tier 1 universal hub. Like what can we do to beef up universal as much as possible so kids don't fall behind to begin with. But also then have some of those MLSS plans, just, okay, here's what we're going to do if the kids aren't making the gains that we want them to make. There's not one secret formula to it. It's a process, and really it comes down to relationships as well. I think that's one of the reasons that, especially coming out of the pandemic, we've been so focused on SEL and building student relationships, because we know that is key in order to get some of those students that are behind connected to school. So no magic number. I do want to thank the principals for their instructional leadership, their focus on the data. They definitely have embraced a culture of improvement, a culture of continuous improvement, and I definitely can't say enough great things about their efforts and their plans over the year, and they're doing just great work. The last next step from a district level standpoint is overall readiness in our Portrait of a Red Hawk. So as we rolled out our Portrait of a Red Hawk and our 5 characteristics this year in our anchor statement, we shared our next step was going to be building our continuum of what does this look like at each level? So what does the collaborator look like at the K-3 level? What does the collaborator look like at the 4, 6, 7, 8, and at the high school level? So we're going to start to define some of those look-fors, and we're going to hopefully have that complete by summer, and then be able to roll that out next year. And it'll give our teachers even more information and give our parents even more information on how our kids are doing. And then that next step is determine some measure of successes to build our district readiness dashboard. So that is a plan for us as a district. So beyond just having to look to our overall district report card, we're going to build a readiness dashboard with certain measures that we're going to be looking for every single year. Some of those reportables that stay, the non-reportables, just so we're always looking at improvement as a district.
I've got a question, or maybe it's more of an observation as I tried to wade through this data and stay from a high level and not get too lost in the numbers. A couple of things jumped out at me, and I don't know who could respond, and I'm going to just kind of make the observation and see if someone can help me process it. I'm troubled a bit by the fact that if I look at the forward data, and I realize the Aspire data we're moving away from, but what we've got, that we can perform at those particular grade levels above some sort of a benchmark or comparison, whether it's the state or the national or whatever, and reflected up to our upper learners, we don't do that with our ACT score. We fall below the state. And so that's troubling, how we can be ahead of some benchmark and then fall below. So that I wanted to bring that point up. And then on the SEL side, help me not be panicked that we're in the 10th percentile for some sort of a school climate or safety observation. And I realize first year with the data, I don't want to be knee-jerk reactive, but I'm alarmed that Milton, Wisconsin could be in the 10th percentile in any measure. So help me process that.
Start on that, Ryan, or Columbia too?
Do you want me to do ACT or what do you? So let me start with the ACT. It's definitely been an ongoing conversation at the high school. And I know on December 5th is our next PD day. I know the high school admin is planning a conversation with the staff where they're digging into the report card, they're digging into their data. And they're gonna just have some good, honest conversations about where they've been, where they are, and where they want to be. We kind of talked about that, the college and career readiness for all mindset. I think that's part of that play. We want to make sure that we speak to college and career readiness the same way that we do to our top achievers, to that lowest score in 25%, because our goal is to get every kid to that spot where they're college and career ready, and then they make the choice where they want to go. That's not our choice. We give them the skills to go down whichever path that they want to go to.
Ryan, are they looking at the ACT as not as a part, since a lot of schools aren't requiring it now? So they're like, well, they're not really going to need it. Before it was like, oh, this is my first free test. My parents don't have to pay for this. Hopefully I don't have to take it again because I score higher. Is that part of the picture, or is it just overall the flattening of scores? I know every school's seeing that, but.
I think there's definitely, that is part of the conversation, without a doubt. But also the fact that we fell below the state average on that's the piece that's really concerning to me. So whether or not that's really happening here within Milton, then why did we fall below the state average would be my wonder and question. And to me, puts an emphasis of importance on that discussion that we have with the a few weeks back, we had our curriculum committee and we proposed some changes at the 9th grade level around social studies. Part of that was to increase the rigor for our 9th graders in their freshman year. We wanted to make sure that they had some more rigorous curriculum, and the fact that a high percentage of our kids didn't have social studies until their sophomore year. We saw it and said, no, we want to make sure that our kids are starting to work on that skill set much sweeter. So those are two things that we're doing. Again, we're going to be engaged in that. The high school staff is going to be engaging in a good conversation on that.
And then I can speak to the other question that Joe had around the SEL screener, and Julie, if you want to add some things to this too. I want to make sure that I think that I heard you mention both the school climate and school safety issues, and I want to make sure that if people are watching that they're not that they're clear on the school safety. We were at the 60 to 79th percentile on the responses to that at the 6th through 12th grade level.
Yeah, I might have misspoken there. I'm talking about the orange dots.
Yeah, and on the school climate though, in the sense of belonging are the two areas where it's in the 0 to the 19th percentile, so in that bottom area. And if we scroll back up to the page that had those specific questions, one of the things that we do then is when we get this data is we dig into what specifically is being asked around school climate and what's asked around sense of belonging. And you can see on that slide on school climate, it talks about how often do teachers seem excited about teaching your class, how positive or negative is the energy in your school, how much does the behavior of others hurt or help your learning. So those are things that at each individual school they would dive into and at each of those classrooms. And on sense of belonging, overall, how much do you feel like you belong at your school? How connected do you feel to the adults in your building, and how well do people understand you as a person? So those are obviously areas, and 6th through 12th is a wide range. So at each of our schools, they look at that, they break that data down for their individual level, and then look for ways to gather more information from students about why they feel that way and how they feel on that topic, and then develop plans on how we can address those needs that students have.
Yeah, and this was one point in time. So again, it's their perception of how they feel rating themselves on that day. So we know that the next day, if they take the survey again, that they could respond differently. This is the first time they've seen these questions, and now we'll be able to, again, get curious about what we learned and hopefully provide a little bit more support in teaching around what that means when they respond a certain way. And hopefully we'll see some growth when we take it again in the spring. But we've seen nationwide with COVID and with the regression of mental health issues, we know that there are needs at the higher levels. We know that. We know that kids' social emotional skills are lower than typical that we've seen in the past. So we're doing what we can to address that, but we have to reteach, and we have to keep the conversation going, and we have to keep the supports in place for social emotional needs and for student services support. So it's something that we'll definitely be able to address now that we know, but it is one point in time that we can respond to. So.
And as Principal Billhorn shared with the connectedness survey in the past, gave us different data than this. So it's a different measurement tool. So we'll look back to that data, see where there's trends which show an ongoing trend, but also dive into this new data and look for ways to address that.
Can I just ask the two students who have there, this would have been your senior, so it would have been your class last year with this data. What do you hear the students saying about taking ECT, and you think it's different? I mean, there's people that are going to take it seriously and try and do the rest of it, but overall, what do you think you're hearing in the class?
I think ultimately, if you know what school you want to go to and they require the ACT or the SAT, then you're going to take it a couple times. I know I retook it to try to do better, but if you don't want to go to four-year university, or your university doesn't meet those ACT scores, especially since a lot of them are waived, then I do understand why some don't want to put in as much effort.
And then you can't prep for it or anything.
Right. And I heard the chalk talk, it was kind of like our first round with it. So some things, I think it was helpful to see where you were in the beginning, where you started out, but then I think it needed just a little bit more to actually help like the study habits. The initial was good.
That's interesting. Thank you.
When we test I know we had the juniors all take the ACT. Had they seen a test like that prior to the ACT itself? I mean, there's a bit of a technique or skill in that test, right? I mean, I'm familiar with it. So, and the other question I got is, if there's a number of kids that take the test more than once, does the improved score factor into our total score? No.
The improved score doesn't factor into our score. And last year, I believe all 11th graders also took the pre-ACT practice.
Okay, so that does give them a bit of a practice, if you will. So
And the chalk talk questions are all actual ACT questions.
Are they? Okay.
And most of the English classes and math classes are all embedded ACT style questions, or most of them are retired ACT questions.
Okay.
As part of their just the regular summative assessments.
Okay, anybody else? Well, my thanks to everybody that compiled that. As I perused the data over the weekend, it kind of struck me that this is basically at the core of what we're doing here, right? K to 12, teaching kids, measuring how they're doing and seeing how we can improve. So hats off to everybody in the district, admin, and all the way down to the classroom teachers and aides. This is, it's really valuable. You can't improve if you don't know where you are. So thank you to everybody. Okay, we will move on to new business. And I believe Ryan's going to stay on cue. Discussion and possible action of the public hearing relative to an early start waiver with our school calendar.
All right. You want to try it? Okay, all right, perfect. If you could stick to the background slide. Thank you so much. So I'm sorry you have to listen to me a little bit longer here today, but this section will definitely be shorter. So the purpose of tonight is to talk about a waiver hearing for our calendar for the 2022-2023 school year. Now, according to state law, we are not supposed to start school before September 1st. Unless it meets certain conditions, and then you can apply for a school waiver. Historically, some of those conditions have been, it might be a building project, it might have been an event that caused a district or a school to miss a certain number of days the year before, it might be a transportation issue. There's several different pieces, and after the COVID-19 pandemic, the response to COVID instruction is also a reason, according to GPI, to apply for an early waiver to the school year. So with that, our process has been over the last couple of years. We've had an admin team come together. We mocked up a calendar. We brought that then to the MEA, and then we brought it to the curriculum committee for final review, and then we bring it forth. Our purpose tonight is not to bring a final calendar. Our purpose is just to talk about the waiver. Because when our admin team came together and we looked at the fact that next year, September 1st is a Friday, we definitely wanted to start earlier. We wanted to be able to get into our routines sooner. We wanted to be able to give our screeners sooner. We want to be able to respond to student needs in a quicker manner. In order to do that, we needed to have a public hearing. So we are following DPI's recommendation, and everything we're doing tonight, this presentation and potential resolution, is all based on what we need to do from DPI in order to meet the waiver exception. So with that, the specific reason we are exploring the waiver is the continued educational impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. Meaning we want to make sure that we continue to educate all students. We just talked about all of our data. We looked at our school report card data. We had some celebrations. We also had some areas of growth. And due to some of those target group outcomes and our hope to address those targeted outcomes sooner. That is why we are asking for an early start. We move to the next. So the early start gives us some instructional time, some additional instructional time earlier in the year. So as we talked as an admin team, we find that August time, that September instructional time very valuable. We'd rather have that time in August and September than in June, because that's really the time that we can be making an impact with our students. This will also help us address our first two pillars of our strategic plan. That's teaching and learning and relations, climate, and culture, the heart of what we do. So again, we want to address our student gaps in learning from our target outcomes. This will help us approach our social emotional learning earlier on to start the year and start our interventions earlier. And we're also hoping that it will have a good effect on our summer school enrollment too. By being able to start the school year earlier, that will give our families just a little bit of break in between our end of our school year and the start of summer school. We're hoping that can help drive up our numbers to where we were. Sarah's done an awesome job of keeping those numbers high over the year, and we think this could bring those numbers up even higher. So with that, we don't have the specifics in terms of when we would end and where the rest of the calendar would fall. As an admin team, we started to mock up draft 1, draft 2, or option A or option B. And we didn't want to get too far down the road until we had our public hearing and were able to discuss it at the board level whether or not we could pursue an early waiver to start the year. But if we would pursue the early waiver, it would be to start school on Tuesday, August 29th. That gives us 3 additional days, so we would get a 4-day week before the holiday weekend. A good amount of time to get all of our students in a good routine for the year, to start teaching those SEL skills. Otherwise, if we're not able to make the waiver, our first day of school would be September 1st, which is that Friday. So we would have 1 day of school and then followed by a 3-day weekend. So not necessarily ideal for creating a rigorous learning environment. So our resolution, so the Board of Education, in order to receive a waiver, must pass a resolution in favor of starting the school year prior to September 1. And then if you put forward this resolution, then my job will be to share this resolution with the state, that we would fill out an application. We would share the evidence that we had a public hearing in the form of a school board meeting. So we would have to share the information along with a narrative, a little bit deeper from that instructional lens of why we are seeking an early start. And from our understanding, the waivers are done on a rolling basis, meaning there's not a set time where it needs to be in. So we're hoping that we will have a quick turnaround time response to a potential waiver. What questions do you have for myself or any of you?
I got a question.
Yeah.
If we pass the resolution tonight, can we still go with September 1st start date?
Yes.
And then that final calendar, does the board vote on that, or is that a MEA admin type decision?
The final calendar, it's been done several different ways in my 4 years. So we finally started bringing it to the curriculum committee, where we brought feedback there, and then we brought it to the board level. And I don't think we approved it at the board level. It was more we discussed it and moved forward.
We've actually done it both ways. I mean, we've approved it, and sometimes we've just been informed.
So the step tonight is really the first step. We need to have tonight's public hearing and board adoption of the resolution in order to apply to DPI to get permission to have that as an option, that earlier start date. And then as Ryan shared, if we get that approval from DPI, then we would bring a option that includes that early start and an option that includes September 1st start, and have that conversation with the curriculum committee before coming to the board.
Is there any issue with transportation?
No. transportation would be available. And it isn't adding additional days to the school year, it's just front loading those days so that you're having those, you're not starting with a Friday and then 3 days off and then coming back and kind of having to redo all the routines that you started on that Friday. And also the feeling that as we look at our student achievement data, having as much instructional time prior to taking the tests rather than instructional time after the tests are taken is valuable too.
I think this makes a lot of sense. So I'll move to approve the recommended resolution as presented.
Do you want it for the, you want to read the resolution, please, so that it ends up in the minutes?
That's how it's presented on here, but I can read the PowerPoint if you want.
I would prefer it.
All right. To that page here. Just reading this in the third person. The School District of Milton requests the ability to start the 2023-2024 school year on the 29th day of August, 2023 due to the continued efforts to address negative impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic.
I'll second that, but I just have a question first. So
sure.
Say the waiver gets denied. Now, some people might say it makes more sense just to start on Tuesday.
We would look at that as an option.
I'm just, something, you know, either people are on vacation or something, they come back for 1 day at school. I don't know, just a thought, I guess.
Okay, we've got a motion on the floor and seconded. Dave made the motion, seconded by Rick, to adopt the resolution that Dave read. Any questions on it?
I would like to see sooner than later with the calendar, then if they would be able to get out earlier than graduation, earlier for starting 3 days or 4 days earlier eventually.
Any other questions? All in favor of approval of adopting the resolution, signify with aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Thank you, Mr. Ruggles. Okay, next on new business, B is the spring 2023 school board election. This is Carly's world.
Yes, one quick thing before I turn it over to Carly, it's not an action item by the board, but a requirement that we share the upcoming election information. So I'll let Carly kind of talk through what's in the document.
Yep, this was published in the Courier on November 18th. It just gives the details for the upcoming election. April 4th will be the spring election. There is the campaign registration statement, declaration of candidacy, and signed nomination papers must be filed no later than 5 p.m. on Tuesday, January 3rd at district office. Circulation of nomination papers should not be before December 1st. And if it is necessary, we'll have a primary on February 21st.
Just for housekeeping, primaries are triggered when there are more than 2 times the number of candidates that there are open seats.
So with 2 open seats, if there are 4 or fewer candidates, there would not be a primary. If there's 5 or more, there would be a primary.
Correct.
I want to note for anyone that's considering running for school board that the district office is closed for a period of time over the holidays between December 23rd and January 2nd. The district office is closed, so if people are planning to come to the district office and pick up nomination papers, please do that prior to that time. And then if the documents need to be filed at the district office by 5 p.m. on Tuesday, January 3rd at the very latest.
And I think we've usually announced that folks unfamiliar with the process, we invite them to call, and we would be certainly, letting them know what steps need to be taken to do so.
Absolutely. We'd be happy to answer any questions that anyone has or hear their thoughts. We also included here an electronic copy of the Wisconsin Association of School Boards Guide for Candidates that has a lot of detailed information on running for office.
Okay, without any other questions, we will move on. And Ms. Carrie Bradley is making her way up. Item C on new business is 2023-24 budget projections. Welcome, Carrie.
Thank you.
Tonight, we're just going to spend a brief amount of time talking about school finance. And what we want to touch on is our revenue projections, specifically our Fund 10 revenue projections. And as you have heard me say for the last year and a half, we're going to talk about the impact of the revenue limit, the impact of using one-time federal COVID funds, and also how the state legislature will impact our revenue outlook. And since I'm talking about budget planning, you've heard it before, and one of these days when you're all going to say this instead of me, but we need to remember when we're doing our budget planning, this is our financial plan that's used to implement our district's educational and operational activities. It is based on information that's available at a point in time. We recently adopted the budget and set the levy. That was based on a preliminary budget that we developed in June, and that also went to the annual meeting. Our current adopted budget will be adjusted in August, and the first dot point I have is really after we adopt that budget in the fall, then we start gearing up for next year. And as we did last year, not just next year, but looking out 2 or 3 years. That's our path. And then just a reminder that when we're doing forecasting, it's estimates and projections, and all of that is at a point in time. And we talk about our purposes and uses, which are expenditures, and we talk about our sources, which are our revenues. So if you go to the next slide then. So when we talk about our Fund 10 revenues, or our general operating revenues, we have already identified before, and we're just going to do the reminder again, that our largest source of revenues are controlled by the legislature, and that is our revenue limit calculation, which is made up of our general state aid and our tax levy. And we also, I'm beginning now, I hadn't identified before, but per pupil categorical aid is now the largest categorical aid program that we receive. It used to be special education aid, but it was overtaken by that per pupil categorical aid a couple of years ago. Both of those are not only controlled by the legislature, but they're controlled also by our resident FTE count, or that's a factor in calculating that. And then we have also talked about the state budget cycle, and that is a 2-year cycle. We are currently in the 2nd year of the cycle, and while we're waiting for the legislature to begin that process, which hopefully will conclude at the beginning of the summer, we will work with using current law for our assumptions. And then also, I did a modification and a second assumption on what the legislature might do. Full disclosure, I had no crystal ball. I have been wrong in the past, but that doesn't stop us, right, from starting with what does the law say right now? If they make no changes and the law stays the same, what would it look like with revenue limits? And then also with our $6 billion surplus, what might they do next year? So if you go to the next slide, then we're going to just dial in on the revenue limit and per pupil aid. And if you can see on the bar chart across the top, the gray portion is the revenue limit controlled revenue, which again is tax levy and general aids. The purple part is the categorical per pupil aid, and then the darker green, turquoise colors is not my strength, is the remainder of our revenues. And then you can see then with the numbers listed on the side, right, that 82.8% of our revenues are controlled by the revenue limit, and about 5.5% are that per pupil categorical aid. So overall, 88% of our general operating revenues are coming from these sources. And then just a reminder, on the bottom left, the purple colored box is the resident membership FTE. And we have talked about the difference between enrollment and membership, right? Enrollment are students in our seats, and then the membership is around our resident count. And our resident count is declining, and the declining in that full-time equivalency then will impact our revenue limit. So if you go to the next slide, there's a summary, a high-level summary of the revenue limit calculation. There's a lot of steps in the process that aren't here, but the takeaways you need are here. So if you look at the table, we have a historical, which is last year. The blue is our current year calculation. Then there's two yellow columns. One is based on current law, and one is a what if scenario. What if the legislature were to take action to increase our per pupil amount that we're allowed by in the formula by $250. And so if you compare the current law, you can see where it says per pupil increase applied on the left under base revenue, that it is 0 prior year, current year, and then if we stick with current law, it would be 0, and then you can see the $250 there. The other thing you're also saying, oh my gosh, look at that base revenue line just above there. How many times has Carrie told us with declining enrollment, our base revenue is going to decline, and that's kind of what we're now seeing as we move forward. All in with the recurring exemptions and non-recurring exemptions then are at the very bottom. And if you compare our current year at the 38 million with the 0, if we take current law, that is about $485,000, $486,000 less. And if legislative action is taken to change the law and they decide to pick a $250 increase, then you'll see that it is pretty close to what we have this year, which would be flat. And again, this is a starting point in looking at revenues. There's no crystal ball here, but we need to put something on paper to kind of think about our what ifs. So then if you go to the next slide, there's a bar chart. And we're going to point out that the bar chart, make sure you're looking at the scale on the side. It begins at 41 million. And this is our total Fund 10 revenues. And what we need to be aware of then, the first column is our current year. And then the second column, which is 23-24, is showing the impact of the change in the revenue limit of the $485,000. And then remember, we used $920,000 of one-time money. So that drop there is the combination of the decline in the revenue limit was 0, and then the removal of the one-time funds. And then if you go as you go to the right, there's a decline. It's not as dramatic. And then I've included 26-27 in here, because that's the year that our 2.5 million non-recurring drops off. So it's here for informational purposes, so it's all informational, but once we get beyond 3 years in projections, there are more unknowns happening. So it's not that this isn't a valid projection, it's just not as reliable, but we need to include it because we need to be mindful that non-recurring revenue is going to be dropping off.
Carrie, before you go on to the next slide, I'm going to have you pause just for a minute to see if there are any questions from the board, but also to highlight, as we look at the slide that's on the board, again, that's assuming current law with no per pupil increase, and that's a possibility. As Gary shared, we don't know what the legislature is going to do. But that decrease from this year's revenue to next year's revenue of about $1,400,000 or so takes into account the declining enrollment decrease from the slide before, and also, as Gary shared, that $920,000 in one-time federal money through the COVID relief ESSER funds that we're utilizing to balance this year's budget. So that $920,000 is included in the first bar, the current year's bar, but that money will no longer be available after this year. If there aren't any questions, then Carrie, if the next slide is with that option of a $250 per student increase.
Correct. So as we look at possibilities and options for the future, the next slide shows what if we put in that revenue mix calculation a $250 per student increase. And you can see that there is a decline. The decline, as we said, the revenue limit was about even. So that decline is really a reflection of the one-time federal money. And then it also then will trend upward rather than downward, because putting that 250 in will build the base. Without the 250, the base erodes. So the 250 will cause it to grow. And then if you look at 24, 25, which is what, 1, 2, 3 years out, we're going to be slightly above where we are right now. Because right now it's 46 million, and then in 3 years it will be about 46,400,000. And then again, the non-recurring revenue drops off in 26, 27.
So these projections are for revenue only. So this is just looking at, you've heard us talk before about revenue staying flat, and if enrollment decreases, revenue's even going down a little bit. That doesn't take into account any changes in expenditures. So if you go to the next slide, Carly, I'll speak a little bit to the two circle graphs that are shown here. The one on the left is this year's budgeted operating revenues, and this is Fund 10 and Fund 27 combined, and it's showing where that money is coming from. So as Carrie shared, a majority of that is coming from the state, 59% from the state, 30% from local taxes and fees, 5% from the federal government, and that includes the ESSER money that we have as part of this year's budget, and then 6% from open enrollment in. So that pie represents this current year's operating revenues. On the right side represents our operating expenses, both in Fund 10 and Fund 27. And what's highlighted there are the different areas where those expenses come from. And you see by far the three largest areas are wages at about 50% of the total expenses, benefits at about 22% of the expenses, and purchase services at about 21%. Purchase services include a number of different things. The biggest chunks in purchase services include our transportation contract with Go Right Way for getting kids to school and home from school and to different events. Our contract with Teachers on Call for substitute teachers are included in this. Some of our staffing, and a good example of staffing that would fall in that category rather than wages. We heard at a previous board meeting, our school nurses, that's part of the contract with Fort Healthcare. So those aren't direct wages from our district, but they are purchase services for that staff. So when you've heard us in the past say that for our district and districts across the state, anywhere from 75 to 80% of expenditures are typically around people. That's wages, benefits, and any purchase services that include people. Right now for this current year, those two pies are the same size. Our budget is balanced between our operating revenues and our operating expenses for this current year, but it's balanced because of the use of the one-time COVID fund. So we know that between the revenue limit and declining enrollment and the $920,000 in one-time COVID funds being gone for next year, we know that revenue pie is likely to get smaller. And I say likely because we don't know what action the legislature is going to take. We saw in the previous slide that even if the legislature approves an additional $250 per pupil, that revenue pie is going to be smaller next year than it is this year. Then in order to have a balanced budget for next year, operating expenses would need to be adjusted to correspond with operating revenues. We know that our current environment is that there's inflationary pressures. We've used anywhere from 2 to 3% as an estimate for increased cost in previous years. But we also know that inflation is running considerably higher than that range, both for this current year and for the coming year. And we also know that we're facing increased both inflationary pressures in staffing and increased competition for staff, and also inflationary pressures in other parts of the budget. We've had a conversation with the HR committee around benefits, and medical insurance costs are a large part of our benefits costs. And we know that with our rate cap, with our medical insurance provider being capped at 6.9% for the coming year, we anticipate that cap will get hit. So we're looking at, as I think we've shared earlier, about a $350,000 increase in medical insurance costs for the coming year if that 6.9% cap is hit. And then after, if we project out further after this coming year, that rate cap is gone. In many districts in our area have seen 10% or more increases in medical insurance. So we know that keeping the expense size of the pie at the same size or smaller has the potential for significant impact on our programs and things that we're able to offer for students. So the main thing that we're looking at tonight are those revenue projections. We have a joint strategic planning and finance committee meeting coming up on Wednesday. And then at our board meeting on December 12th, we'll start diving into a little bit more into projections for those operating expenses. But we know that if revenues are anticipated to decrease, and then we take away that $920,000 gap that we've been able to use, it's extremely likely that we'll have a budget deficit for the next year and upcoming years. So we'll have to have conversations about ways that can be addressed. And we had the last slide are some key takeaways from the information that's shared. I'll pivot back to Carrie to highlight those key takeaways.
As we talked about, right, we're just talking right now about Fund 10 revenues, most specifically the revenue limit, and that really is the first step when we're projecting revenues. Approximately 83% of our general fund budget is controlled by state-imposed revenue caps. We are very aware that legislative action is going to impact those future revenues. The one-time funds used to close a gap, it won't fill gaps in the future. Those are points you've already heard me say, and there's a couple more I think we need to be layering on. And it wasn't the story in June, right? Life has changed. So we're also anticipating higher than normal inflationary pressures. And then also, as we said, or Rich talked about too, is this greater competition for staff. So those are all the things that we need to be mindful of as we continue walking through the projection process, make our decisions. Do you have any questions? Best conclusion to a meeting ever? You got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. All right, and we will bump down to miscellaneous. A is our staffing report, copy of which is in board docs.
I move to approve the staffing report presented.
Second.
So a motion from Rick, seconded by John, who beat Shelley by a minuscule amount, to approve the staffing report. Questions on the staffing report? All in favor of approval signify with aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Thank you. And meeting dates, Mr. Don.
We have a few upcoming meetings that I want to highlight. In December, we have just one school board meeting, so our next regular school board meeting is on Monday, December 12th, 2 weeks from tonight, at 6:30 here in the district office. And then we will be into January for our next regular school board meeting after that. We have a few committee meetings that are scheduled over the upcoming weeks. As I mentioned earlier, on Wednesday, November 30th, in 2 days, we have a joint strategic planning and finance committee meeting. That will be at noon here in the first floor conference room. We have an HR committee meeting on Wednesday, December 7th. That will be a 1 o'clock start, also in the first floor conference room. We have 2 finance committee meetings scheduled for January. One on Wednesday, January 4th, and one on Wednesday, January 11th. Both of those will start at noon, and both of those will be held here at district office in the first floor conference room. And we are looking at a possible policy committee meeting after the December 12th board meeting. So we'll be reaching out to policy committee members here in the coming week to find out their availability for a policy committee meeting sometime between that December 12th school board meeting and the end of December. And then we'd be able to bring those policies to the full board in January.
All right. Questions on any of the meeting dates? If not, I got no more agenda.
I move we adjourn.
Second. Rick and Dave. All in favor, say aye. Aye. And opposed. Thank you, folks. There are 2 minutes in there from the closed session. So we've approved, we just need to sign.
Yeah, right.
There's 2 of them.
Last year, we lost like the